All right, today we're jumping into some of the toughest, but also some of the most incredible chapters in the entire book of Ezekiel. We're going to unpack the intense prophecies and really vivid stories God gave him. You got to remember, he's talking to a people who've lost everything, living in exile, and they're just trying to figure out what went wrong and if there's any hope left.
So here's our game plan. We're going to start with a truly shocking story about Jerusalem's betrayal. Then we'll decode a political riddle about a couple of eagles. After that, we dive into a revolutionary idea about personal responsibility, listen to a sad, sad song for Judah's kings, and wrap up with a pretty brutal history lesson. So let's just get right into it.
Our first stop, chapter 16, is, well, you might want to brace yourselves. This is one of the most raw and intense allegories in the whole Bible. God uses this incredibly personal metaphor, a marriage, to tell the story of his relationship with Jerusalem, and it is an emotional roller coaster of grace and betrayal.
God starts with this just gut-wrenching image. He says to Jerusalem, picture this. You were a newborn baby thrown out into a field to die, unwanted, unwashed, completely helpless. I mean, that's the level of absolute vulnerability where God found her.
And the story's arc from there is just staggering. God doesn't just save this baby. He raises her, he makes a sacred promise, a covenant, like a marriage, and he decks her out like a queen. But then, the tragedy. She becomes proud, forgets where she came from, and betrays him by chasing after idols and making deals with other nations. It's a deeply offensive spiritual adultery, and the judgment for it is harsh. But just when you think it's over, the chapter ends with this incredible twist of grace. God promises he will remember his first promise and, one day, make a new, unbreakable one.
Okay, so we're shifting gears now. We're moving from that really personal story to what feels more like a political riddle. It's all about eagles and divine. The style is totally different, but you'll see the core theme is exactly the same: broken promises.
So let's crack the code here. The first big eagle, that's Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. He came in, took Judah's king, and put a new guy in charge, Zedekiah. And Zedekiah is the vine. Now, Zedekiah swore a solemn oath to be loyal to Babylon, an oath made in God's name. But what does he do? He turns right around and tries to make a secret deal with the second eagle, the Pharaoh of Egypt, to help him rebel. He broke the very promise that put him on the throne.
And you can probably guess, that betrayal doesn't end well. God makes it clear Zedekiah's little rebellion is doomed to fail. But, and are you seeing a pattern here? Right after the judgment comes this amazing promise of hope. God says, essentially, you guys messed up, so I myself will take a tiny tender branch and I will plant it. And this isn't just any tree. It's a powerful prophecy pointing to a future true king and a kingdom that will last.
Now we take a huge pivot. We're moving away from these big national stories to a core theological idea that was an absolute game changer. The people in exile were just crushed, and this chapter tackles their biggest question about fairness and suffering head on.
I mean, try to put yourself in their shoes for a second. Your home is gone, you're a refugee, and you're trying to make sense of it all. It's so much easier to blame someone else, right? To say, hey, we're suffering because of what our parents and grandparents did, not us.
And they had this common saying that perfectly captured that feeling. It basically meant, our ancestors ate the bad fruit, and now we're stuck with the sour taste. It was, let's be honest, a really convenient excuse to avoid taking any personal responsibility.
But then God steps in through Ezekiel and says, nope, we're done with that proverb, it's canceled. He lays down a radical new standard of individual accountability. The person who does right will be credited for their rightness, and the person who sins will be held accountable for their sin. Your destiny is not sealed by your ancestors.
And here's the beautiful part. This isn't just about blame, it's about freedom and hope. God is making it crystal clear that anyone can turn around. A wicked person can repent and find life. He says he doesn't get any joy from seeing people suffer. What he wants is for them to choose to turn back to him and live. That is an incredibly empowering message.
So right after that amazing message of personal hope, the focus just snaps right back to the nation's failed leaders. Ezekiel is told to sing a lament, basically a funeral song, for the princes of Israel. He's mourning the total collapse of the royal family.
The poetry here is so powerful. Judah is a lioness, and she raises 2 cubs to be kings. The first cub grows up to be a predator, just destroying people until he gets trapped and dragged off to Egypt. The second cub, he's even more destructive, and he meets the same fate, captured and hauled away in chains to Babylon. It's just a tragic, heartbreaking funeral dirge for a monarchy that was once so strong
and now is just gone. So for our final chapter, the elders of Israel come to Ezekiel. They want to ask God for guidance. What should we do? But God's response is stunning. He basically says, you want to talk to me? I don't think so. Instead, he tells Ezekiel to confront them with a long, painful look at their own history.
And God just lays out the evidence. It's devastating. He makes it so clear that their exile isn't some random recent event. No, he traces this unbroken line of rebellion all the way back. It started in Egypt, it continued in the wilderness with their parents' generation, it continued with their generation in the wilderness, and it kept right on going once they got to the Promised Land. At every single stage, they chose to ignore him and chase other things.
So the obvious question is, why didn't God just destroy them and be done with it? And he gives the answer over and over again. He held back, not because they deserved it, but for the sake of his own name. He acted to protect his own reputation among the nations so no one could say his promises failed or he wasn't powerful enough to follow through. It's a really humbling reminder that God's mercy is ultimately rooted in who he is, not in who we are. Okay, so we've talked about an unfaithful wife, a treacherous vine, a call to personal choice, a fallen monarchy, and a long, long history of rebellion. It feels like a lot of different stories, right? So what's the thread that ties all of this together?
Well, when you put it all together, you see this complex but really clear picture. It's all about the tension between human failure and God's faithfulness. These chapters show, without a doubt, that breaking our promises to God has real, serious consequences for us as individuals and as a nation. Yet, woven through every single declaration of judgment, there is this undeniable, persistent thread of God's mercy and his ultimate promise to restore his people with a covenant that will never be broken.
And that really brings us to the final thought to chew on. This ancient text forces us to look at that profound tension between justice and mercy, between our own accountability and God's incredible grace. It pushes us beyond just ancient history and leaves us with a question for right now. How does that exact same tension play out in our own lives, in our own communities, and in our own deep need for a grace we could never earn?